Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 755, and today is February 7th, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Of course, there is a lot of news to go over on today's show, so I'm going to jump right into it after doing just a couple of plugs here. The first is, hopefully you're subscribed to this show somewhere, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcast. Of course, this show, along with all my work, is hosted at the Libertarian Institute and reprinted on the blog at antiwar.com. Additionally, I have the all-new Kyle Anzalone show, and we're putting out 2 episodes every week, Monday and Wednesday at 4:45. We stream those live. So if you want to check out that channel, it is the first link in the show notes page. And this week we covered, of course, Trump's remarks while with Benjamin Netanyahu. So if you're interested in my take on that, be sure you head on over and listen to the Kyle Anzalone show. With that, let's get into this episode of Conflicts of Interest. All right, first up here. Trump sending illegal immigrants to torture prison at Guantanamo Bay, not migrant facility. So this was a really big story. It's, somewhat understandably not getting a whole lot of attention. I understand why people are kind of more focused on other issues, but this is really significant. So the Donald Trump administration is sending some illegal immigrants deported from the U.S. to a military prison at Guantanamo Bay. The facility was constructed by the George W. Bush administration to house detainees in the CIA torture program. Initially, the White House said the migrants would be imprisoned at a separate facility in U.S.-occupied Cuba. So last week, Trump signed an executive order to begin sending illegal immigrants to a migrant detention facility at Guantanamo Bay and expand its capacity to 30,000 beds. Trump said those deported to the prison were such dangerous criminals that the White House could not risk sending them back to their home countries and then later returning to the U.S. According to several officials speaking with NBC News, the migrants will not be sent to the migrant facility, but rather to the infamous torture prison. So it says the majority of the immigrants sent to Guantanamo under Trump's plan are expected to be held temporarily in tent camps near the prison before being transported to their home country. But those considered by the administration to be the most dangerous criminals are expected to be held separately at the facility used to hold detainees accused of terrorism. So the first deportation of 10 flights was conducted on, or there wasn't 10 flights, there was 1 flight with 10 people on it, and that was on Tuesday. The administration claims they were affiliated with Latin American gangs. On Trump's first day in office, he signed an executive order that designates some, or that instructs his staff to consider designating some Central American drug cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. I was looking around yesterday. Was at least unable to confirm that was already happening. So it looks like, that's still within his administration. They're discussing maybe which of these cartels, and my guess is most of them are going to be Mexican, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the more well-known gangs from other countries, is it MS-13 or M13 from El Salvador, and then this Venezuelan gang that's gained a lot of attention for its activities and, crimes out in Colorado. So it's unclear what legal authorities that Trump is sending the detainees to the prison under. He also suggested the migrants will be at the facility for an extended period of time. During the Bush presidency, the facility was used to deny detainees their constitutional rights. So last week at a press conference, Trump said, "We have 30,000 beds in Guantanamo to detain the worst criminal illegal aliens threatening the American people. This will double our capacity immediately. And that's tough. That's tough. That's a tough place to get out of." The torture prison opened in 2002 and was used during the War on Terror to house people deemed the worst of the worst by the Bush administration. However, many of the detainees were released after being cleared of involvement with terrorist organizations. John Yoo, who wrote the legal memos authorizing the use of torture, including waterboarding, told NBC News that there are questions about whether the deported migrants at Gitmo will have the legal right to appeal their detention. And of course, I kind of hate citing John Yoo in an article. This man is an absolute monster and a disgrace, and I can't believe that news outlets are going to him to ask his legal opinion. However, I guess the one thing maybe he is an expert on is this, which is using Guantanamo Bay to imprison people indefinitely, extra-constitutionally. All right, so next up here, this one I wrote for the Institute on February 6th. Rubio pushes hawkish agenda on first trip as Secretary of State. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio is finishing up a trip to Latin America where he advanced an interventionist policy in Venezuela, Panama, and Haiti. During a stop to the Dominican Republic on Thursday, Rubio did announce the seizure of a plane owned by Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The U.S. claims the Dassault Falcon 200 has been used to violate American sanctions. Caracas has been subjected to multiple failed U.S. regime change operations over the past 2 decades. During his first administration, Trump significantly increased sanctions on Venezuela. At times, the Joe Biden administration engaged in talks and minor sanctions relief for Venezuela, but the Trump economic war on Venezuela largely remained intact while Biden was in office. In September, the U.S. seized another of Maduro's planes. The aircraft have been used by the Venezuelan officials who are making diplomatic trips. The seizure of Maduro's aircraft followed what appeared to be a successful meeting between the Venezuelan leader and Trump's crisis envoy, Rick Grenell. Last week, Grenell visited Caracas and secured the release of 6 Americans imprisoned in Venezuela. Maduro agreed to accept Venezuelans deported from the U.S. and stated he hoped Caracas and Washington could move in a positive direction. Additionally, so I think this is maybe the more interesting part of the article, the subject of Venezuela. We'll get into Haiti here in just a second. But I want to add, this does suggest there is maybe this interesting discrepancy between Rick Grenell and Marco Rubio and how they're going to approach things. I would imagine that Latin America is probably the one realm where Rubio is going to be very bold and is not going to take a bad seat to Trump's personal envoys like Grenell and like Keith Kellogg. Or Steve Witkoff in the Middle East as well. So this is, it'll be interesting to see how all this plays out. I do think it's probably a setback. If you are Maduro, you try to start things off on the right foot with the Trump administration. And here you have Rubio coming in, doing something needlessly provocative and expanding and enforcing further U.S. sanctions. So, additionally, on his trip, Rubio endorsed the proxy war Biden started in Haiti. Under the previous administration, the U.S. bribed Kenya to deploy its soldiers to Haiti in an effort to take the control of the capital city, back from paramilitary groups and gangs, and support the Washington-installed government in Port-au-Prince. Rubio spoke with the Kenyan president, William Ruto, on Thursday, and said Trump will continue to support the mission. Nairobi has deployed an additional 150 troops to Port-au-Prince. Their arrival in Haiti was timed with Rubio's trip to Santo Domingo. After several months in Haiti, the Kenyan forces have failed to wrestle any control from the gangs in Port-au-Prince. In fact, homicides in Haiti increased in 2024, and the gangs control over 90% of the capital city. The U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince issued a statement that a total of $40.7 million would be distributed to the Haitian National Police and the Kenyan soldiers. Biden spent over $600 million to fund the Kenyan mission. Before leaving office, Biden also deployed 22 American military aircraft to Haiti to support the Kenyan forces. The Dominican Republic was additionally given about $250,000 in storage fees associated with Maduro's planes. The funds, both the ones for Haiti and the ones for the Dominican Republic, required a waiver from the freeze on foreign assistance in order to have them distributed. So We see where the administration priorities are. And while the funding of the foreign aid, sound is good and maybe has some positives to it, it does seem like Rubio is just going around the world giving waivers to, places where it's going to help our regime change efforts and other malign foreign policy. So next up here, Trump envoy rejects Zelensky's demand for nuclear weapons. I wrote this one for the Institute on the 6th. President Donald Trump's envoy to the war in Ukraine firmly rejected Kiev's request for nuclear weapons. President Zelensky recently said that he needs NATO membership or nuclear weapons. In an interview on Fox News, retired General Keith Kellogg said the chances of them getting a nuclear weapon back is somewhere between slim and none. Let's be honest about it, we both know that's not going to happen. Trump's envoy to the conflict was responding to remarks made by Zelensky in an interview with Piers Morgan that was released earlier this week. Zelensky says, "So let's do it the following way. Give us back nuclear arms. Give us missile systems. Partners, help us finance the 1 million man army. Move your contingent on the parts of our state where we want." And so, he's asking for nuclear weapons, and obviously that's the part of that is getting all the attention. That's what the Kremlin responded to. That's what Kellogg is responding to. But he's also saying, give us advanced missile systems. Give us funding to have a 1 million man army. Put your troops on Ukrainian soil. These are all absurd and ridiculous demands, and Zelensky is just rattling them off like, this is what the West needs to do for us. So on Wednesday, the Kremlin spokesman, that's Dmitry Peskov, responded sharply to Zelensky's remarks, saying such statements and remarks in general border on madness. There is a non-proliferation regime for nuclear weapons, among other things. Under President Joe Biden, Washington encouraged Kiev to forgo a diplomatic settlement to the war with Russia and pledged to give Ukraine as much as it takes for as long as it takes. However, Kiev has never had the ability to drive Russian forces from Ukrainian soil, as senior Biden officials have since admitted. Now, Kiev is in a far weaker position than it was in April of 2022, as it is completely relying on Western support to continue the fighting. While Kellogg refused to say if Trump would halt weapon shipments to Ukraine, he argued that as much as it takes for as long as it takes is a slogan and not a policy. He went on to say that Trump would pressure both Kiev and Moscow to come to the table. And so, it was an interesting interview. It was certainly one worth watching. Kellogg was kind of cagey when it came to questions that really would articulate or signal what the American policy would be for Ukraine under Trump. He's not going to comment on weapon shipments going to Ukraine. He's not going to comment on what we're going to do to the Ukrainians to get them to come to the table, or the Russians, whether that's going to be an increase of sanctions. And, that might be things best communicated behind the scenes. So I really hope that discussion and that diplomacy is going on behind the scenes, probably more importantly with Kiev than with Moscow at this point, getting Kiev ready to accept the deal. I think the bigger issue is, and what really has to be addressed, is that the deal that Ukraine ultimately gets is going to be worse than the deal that was on the table, not only pre-invasion, but post-invasion in April of 2022. And so I think for Trump, there's going to be a sense of he doesn't want to make a worse deal because, he sees himself as the king deal maker. And so how could he possibly get a worse deal with Joe Biden? Now, the situation on the ground has changed dramatically, but nuance isn't Trump's strong suit. And so my concern is that Trump doesn't understand how stiff of a deal that Ukraine is going to have to accept here, and that's going to lead this war to continuing for some time. We'll see what happens. Kellogg isn't the best official. At least he's outright denying that Ukraine is ever going to have nuclear weapons. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Several Palestinians killed by Israeli forces in Gaza despite ceasefire. So at least 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli gunfire in southern Gaza on Wednesday despite the ceasefire. An Al Jazeera correspondent said a child was killed by an Israeli sniper, which came a few hours after a Palestinian was shot and killed by Israeli forces east of Rafah. So another Palestinian died due to wounds sustained on the first day of the ceasefire in Rafah's refugee camp. At the Times of Israel put the death toll in Gaza higher, saying that Palestinian media reported 4 were killed by Israeli forces on Wednesday. The Israeli military acknowledged that opened fire on Palestinians in several areas of Gaza. Last week, Gaza's health ministry said more than 80 Palestinians were killed since the ceasefire went into effect on January 19th, including 49 in Rafah. In each incident, it acknowledges that the Israeli military claims its troop opened fire on an imminent threat, but in one incident, the IDF troops shot and killed an unarmed Israeli contractor who was dressed in civilian clothes simply because he was walking towards Israeli troops, demonstrating the free reign that Israeli soldiers have to fire on civilians. The latest violence in Gaza comes as the ceasefire has become even more fragile following Trump's calls for a U.S. takeover of the Gaza Strip, an idea roundly rejected by Palestinian and Arab states. Trump's comments cast doubt on the full implementation of the ceasefire deal. So let's get into this a little bit more. It does seem that this is Trump's, remarks on we're going to take over Gaza, we're going to own it. It very much sounded like he was initially saying that we're going to send our troops to expel the Palestinians. Later, the White House says, they're not going to get there till after the fighting. We'll get to that next. But this is what the Israelis are saying about Trump's proposal. So the Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, on Thursday ordered the military to prepare for the voluntary departure of Palestinians from Gaza, as Israeli officials are hoping to pursue ethnic cleansing following Trump's proposal for the enclave. Katz wrote on X, "I have instructed the IDF to prepare a plan that will allow any resident of Gaza who wishes to leave to do so to any country willing to receive them." The Times of Israel reported that Katz held a meeting with the Israeli military officials to assess how to get Palestinians out of Gaza in line with Trump's proposal. Katz said the plan will include exit option via land crossings as well as special arrangements for departures by sea and air. He said Palestinians should go to Western countries that have been critical of Israel's genocidal tactics in Gaza. Katz wrote, "Countries such as Spain, Ireland, Norway, and others, which have falsely accused Israel over its actions in Gaza, are legally obliged to allow Gazans to enter their territory. Their hypocrisy will be exposed if they refuse." Meanwhile, countries like Canada, which has a structured immigration program, have previously expressed a willingness to take in residents from Gaza. The idea of Western countries taking in Palestinians from Gaza has been suggested before by Israeli officials, including Danny Danon, Israel's current representative to the United Nations. While working in the Knesset, Danon co-authored an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that argued the West should absorb the Palestinians. While Katz and other Israeli officials framed the idea as voluntary migration, ethnic cleansing has been the ideal outcome for the Israeli government since October of 2023. Palestinians have strongly rejected Trump's plan to relocate them, meaning any plan for ethnic cleansing will require to restart the genocidal war, and seems like it will be done in the most brutal of fashions, going, I guess, not door to door, but tent to tent, and pointing your rifles in the faces of Palestinian men, women, children, elderly, the disabled, those maimed by the war, and telling them that they must leave. And then what happens if they refuse? I think that's one thing that needs to be discussed, because look, there's a huge problem that Israel has with Hamas. And it's not at all clear that if they want to go through with this ethnic cleansing plan, that a significant number of Israeli troops wouldn't be killed in the process, or American troops if they take a part of it, because Hamas seems like they are fairly strong at this point. But what are you going to do with the civilians when they also refuse to leave, and when they will maybe start picking up rots of their destroyed homes that their tents are not built on, and throw those rots at American or Israeli soldiers? Are you going to open fire and kill all those innocent civilians? And I think it does seem that we're coming down to the point where we have to realize that the answer to that is yes. Now, another piece of this that I want to talk about, Trump's statements with Netanyahu are gaining a lot of play, but there was one line in there that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. I did break it down on the Kyle Anzalone show, but I just think it's so important that I want to say it again, that Trump says that, there are two things that make Gaza really dangerous: the tunnels and the unexploded ordinances. But when you look at that, now the unexploded ordinances, sure, they're dangerous for everyone, but the combination of the two are particularly dangerous for the occupying force. So whether that's the Israelis, the Americans, whoever are sent in to expel the Palestinians from Gaza, are going to have to deal with the fact that Israel has not destroyed the Hamas tunnel network. That Hamas, rather than being decimated by this fighting, has been able to actively recruit and has been able to sustain its numbers, at least at the 10 to 15,000 or 15,000 or more level. They've lost 10 to 15,000. They've recruited that many, and that's according to U.S. intelligence. Now, we also know, again, this is from Israeli statements, from U.S. statements, that they haven't destroyed even the majority of the tunnel network under Gaza, and that Hamas arms itself with unexploded Israeli ordinances, which are now littering the Gaza landscape. And so Hamas will certainly have the ability to produce weapons at a greater rate and probably have more people to arm and train and put these weapons in the hands of in the future going forward. And so I think it's really important to remember that when, Trump is talking about we got to get rid of the civilians so we could go in and clean the place up and rebuild, the reason that he is saying that is because if things end now, Hamas is going to be stronger than ever in a short period of time. So while Palestinian and Arab states have rejected Trump's proposal for a U.S. takeover of Gaza, which will require ethnic cleansing, Israelis have welcomed it. Katz said, "I welcome President Trump's bold initiative, which can create extensive opportunities for those in Gaza who wish to leave, assist them in resettling in host countries, and support long-term reconstruction efforts in a demilitarized, threat-free Gaza after Hamas, an effort that will take many years." And so, Katz is saying right there that this fighting is going to go on for some time. Now, it does seem that this is an example of Trump maybe walking things back just a little bit. Trump says Israel will hand Gaza to U.S. at the conclusion of fighting. So while during his press conference with Netanyahu, it sounded like Trump was saying that the American troops would be headed to Gaza to help with the ethnic cleansing, or actually to be the ones to do it, it now seems that Trump is trying to say that the American troops won't get there until after Israel has already completed the ethnic cleansing and the Palestinians are gone. So Trump said Thursday, and this wasn't his continuing to push the idea of an eventual U.S. takeover of Gaza. He said the Gaza Strip will be turned over to the United States by Israel at the conclusion of the fighting. So after 15 months of heavy bombing and a ground campaign, Israel has failed to dismantle Hamas, and U.S. intelligence believes the Palestinian group has replaced most of the fighters it lost in that time. That means that even though Gaza has been reduced to rubble, Israel still faces stiff resistance if it attempts to conquer and ethnically cleanse the Strip. In his post, Trump called for the resettlement of Palestinians in Gaza and referred to Senator Chuck Schumer as a Palestinian, something he did well on the campaign trail over Schumer's calls for elections in Israel. The president wrote the Palestinians, people like Chuck Schumer, would have already been resettled in a far safer and more beautiful community with new modern homes in the region. They would actually have a chance to be happy, safe, and free. The U.S. is working with great development teams from all over the world, would slowly and carefully begin the construction of what would now become the greatest and most spectacular developments of its kind on Earth. No soldiers by the U.S. would be needed. Stability for the region would reign. And this again is this presenting of an ethnic cleansing, a genocide of the Palestinian people as somehow a gift to them. That's clearly untrue, and it's just a sick and disgusting way to look at it. This next article reports Jared Kushner behind Trump's calls for the U.S. takeover of Gaza. I find this unsurprising. My thinking on Trump going into this administration was, while it did seem like he was going to try to do many things differently, that overall his decision making had not changed. And so looking back at his first administration, we could probably draw a lot of ideas of what his second administration is going to be like. So making big threats and then walking them back, something Trump did a lot. Putting Jared Kushner in charge of Middle East policy and letting him have this idea of a grand deal of the century, something Trump endorsed during his first administration. We got the Abraham Accords. Images of atrocities being used to sway the president. That this is something that we know happened recently. Where just before Netanyahu met with Trump, he was showed a 30-minute video of atrocities committed on October 7th. Now, I'm sure some of those by Israelis during the Hannibal Directive, but this is the kind of thing where, of course, awful things happened on October 7th. The problem is if you're only seeing one side of the atrocities, and you're particularly not seeing the side of the atrocities that American weapons are committing, then you got a real problem. And so this is, I think, concerning because Kushner seems to like the idea of the ethnic cleansing and the development. And for anybody who is subscribed to the Libertarian Institute Daily Debrief, that's the email I put out every day for the Institute. The one on that you should have in your inbox this morning is on, there's a lot of people who looked at what Trump said about, we're going to take over Gaza and do a job of it. And they're saying that, this is Trump 3D, 10G chess in order to, get Israel to end the occupation of Gaza. This is all kinds of other Trumpian tactics. I think the way I'm looking at it is that Kushner is going to, again, have a massive amount of leverage over what Trump does in the Middle East. Now, second piece to this, too, I think is something that Trump is kind of willing to do when he looks at situations that can be beneficial. I'm not trying to just dismiss this as a negative quality of Donald Trump's. However, it plays out this way with Israel. So, Trump looked at a situation during his first administration, say that the Golan Heights, this is Israeli-occupied Syrian territory and had been since 1967. Israel had built settlements there. It was de facto Israeli territory. Trump recognized that and recognized the Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights. Previous presidents wouldn't do that because it's a violation of international law, because it looks bad. But at the same time, they're going to go along with the de facto annexation, where Trump is willing to come in and just say, this is the reality, I'm going to recognize it. In a sense, doing that is a good thing because at least it moves the conversation forward in a way that you can have a realistic conversation. However, recognizing the reality kind of only ever goes one way, and that's the Israeli way when it comes to Israel. So, Trump recognizing how decimated Gaza is, that it's an unlivable situation and that the strip needs to be rebuilt. It seems that during the Biden administration, they really just thought that there was going to be a ceasefire and then Israel was going to allow the strip to be rebuilt with the Palestinians there. That was never going to happen. And so Trump saying this is maybe bringing a reality to the situation that otherwise wouldn't be discussed in American politics. And so that, again, that's not to justify what Trump is doing in any way. It's just to say that I think that's the way that he's going to look at it. And I think here we're going to see that, he's going to look at the reality of the situation, that Gaza is unlivable. He's going to have Jared Kushner saying that, look, we're going to level the place. We're going to go in with the bulldozers and we're going to start building resorts. And this is going to be something that sways Trump and ultimately is what he's going to kind of build his opinion around in his administration. All right. So Trump signs order imposing sanctions on the ICC for Israel. So on Thursday, Trump signed an executive order to impose sanctions on the International Criminal Court over its investigation into Israeli war crimes. Trump sanctioned officials of the Hague-based court during his first term in office over an ICC investigation into war crimes committed by all sides, including the U.S. and Afghanistan. The Biden administration reversed Trump's sanctions in 2021 and cooperated with the court against Russia, but opposed the ICC issuing arrest warrants against Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for their role in the genocidal war. The ICC also sought warrants for 3 Hamas officials over their role in the October 7th attack, but all 3 have since been killed by Israel. In his order, Trump accused the ICC of engaging in illegitimate and baseless action targeting Americans and our close ally Israel. Now, this is the thing. I'm not a huge fan of international law, international courts. I think oftentimes these bodies are more often weaponized by the United States. You say how we have seen conducted in the war in Ukraine, right? Where this is just used as a propaganda tool against Benjamin Netanyahu. Or not Netanyahu, Vladimir Putin, excuse me. In the case of Israel, we have Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant in particular. These men have made repeated and continued genocidal statements as their soldiers have carried out an indiscriminate killing and starvation campaign in Gaza. And so it would be best if the Israeli courts held Netanyahu accountable, or our government at least cut off funding for the Israelis. However, short of that, at least this ICC investigation and arrest warrant for Netanyahu does bring some shame to a man who is committing a full-on genocide and really needs to be stopped. So next up here, Trump dismisses the idea that the U.S. and Israel will bomb Iran, says he wants a deal. So on Wednesday, President Trump said reports that the U.S. and Israel were planning an attack on Iran were greatly exaggerated, which is just so confusing because the reports that Iran was going to be demolished was, I think, mostly coming from statements from Donald Trump. Now, Trump, he had a very interesting presser on Iran where he signed this executive order that's going to allow more sanctions to be placed on the Iranians. And as he's signing it, he's saying 2 things over and over again. I really don't want to sign it. I really don't want to sanction Iran. And if we can make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear program, then we could have a deal with Iran. Then at the end of his presser, again, so this presser, the takeaway from it is when Trump says that if Iran tries to assassinate me, I'll destroy their entire country, which, of course, I think if any country's leader is assassinated by another country, that is often going to be a call to go to war. So that's not surprising to anyone. But that's what got most of the headlines. I think actually the more important thing that he said, and this is something that's almost never acknowledged by American officials, that Trump actually said that many high-ranking Iranian officials do not want to make a nuclear weapon. And so it's really confusing when Trump is making all these threats towards Iran, saying all Iran has to do is agree not to make a nuclear weapon, and then says that the Iranians don't want to make a nuclear weapon, and he has to know that the U.S. intelligence community assesses that they're not even working on one at this point. So what the hell is the policy for Iran, Donald Trump? Now, he did impose these new sanctions on Iran targeting oil sales to China. My guess is that this could have come as much about Iran as about China from the Trump perspective. So I'm not sure it gives a whole lot of insight into how much Trump is really going to try to crack down on the Iranian economy. He really fumbled the ball on Iran during his first administration. He took the deal, the Iran nuclear deal, which prevented Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and destroyed it at the Adelson's request. And this was a real setback for the U.S.-Iranian relationship. And then he imposed these maximum pressure sanctions on Iran and was never able to get any kind of deal done since. And Iran has, of course, shifted its, I think, stance. It's entered, into the more the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. I don't know if Iran is like flirting with Brits or is looking at, but generally engaging in more trade with the global South and also signing defense pacts with Russia. And so I think Trump is going to find that this time the Iranians are far less concerned about making a deal with Trump than they would have been, say, 2018, 2019. And now Trump tried to drive a really hard bargain and is going to end up with a worse deal in his second administration. All right, last up here, a little piece of good news report: Pentagon drafting plans to pull all troops from Syria. The Pentagon is drafting plans to withdraw all U.S. troops from Syria after President Trump and officials close to him expressed interest in the idea. Israeli media reported that the U.S. informed Israel of its plans to pull out of Syria. Trump denied the report but said that Syria got its own mess and doesn't need the U.S. involved. The NBC report said that officials had drawn up plans to pull all U.S. troops out of Syria within 30, 60, or 90 days. This would be great news. We will see what happens. Trump, of course, tried to do it during his first administration, and his own staffers undermined him and prevented it. Hopefully this time he has the right personnel in place and he could get this done, and we can end our occupation of Syria. All right, everybody, with that, I'm wrapping up the show for today, wrapping it up for the week. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Just in case people aren't aware, on Fridays, I do write news at antiwar.com rather than the Institute. It's Dave DeCam's day off, so I hop in, try to write a couple news stories along with Jason Ditz for antiwar.com. So if you're looking for some of my stuff to read over the weekend, be sure to check out antiwar.com. As always, I'm the opinion editor there. I'm doing the viewpoints every single day, and then I'm also the news editor over at the Libertarian Institute, so I'm writing news there every day. If that's a lot to keep up with conflicts of interest, the Kyle Anzalone Show, antiwar.com, the Libertarian Institute, you can always just follow me on Twitter at Kyle Anzalone_. All the shows, all the articles, everything I do ends up there. Thanks for checking it out, and we'll be back with more content soon.